March 14, 2012, my son Thomas lost his battle with the disease of addiction. I now belong to a club that no parent should ever belong to. Do you know the signs? Do you know the trends that children are doing in today's world? Do you know the signs and symptoms? Do you know the signs and symptoms of drug abuse? I want to empower and educate Long Islanders by bringing a force of professionals and how to prevent the disease of addiction. Long Island in Crisis. Good evening and welcome to Long Island in Crisis. This show is about substance use disorder and really educating and empowering people struggling, their family members, and all loved ones. And even if you don't have a family member, and even by the grace of God, you've been untouched by this insidious disease, you can help someone in your community. There will be a day that you will need this information. And tonight, I am joined by the two amazing women, 42 years of recovery and only 35 years of recovery. Unbelievable. And you are such powerhouses. So Maggie Bloomfield and Susan Dingle. Did I say it right?
Sort of.
Dingle.
Like jingle
I don't
bells.
know.
That's okay.
Dingle, jingle.
Yeah.
Okay, see, you just had to
Yeah.
tell me that then.
Yeah,
Jingle
I'm
bells.
sorry. Right.
Jingle bells. Okay. So, 42 years. What does that even mean to you? Can I just ask you that?
Well, I always want to say I got sober when I was 12. But then I remember that we're supposed to live a life of rigorous honesty. So what it means to me is that I have been sober for most of my adult life. And I could not be more grateful. I drank, I'll just kind of tell my story. You can interrupt at any time, but I drank alcoholically for 13 years. From the time I was 17, I was a good girl in high school. It was in college that I started drinking, and I drank until I was age 30. And originally...
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you had your first drink, did you automatically know that you wanted more and more and more?
Well, I had had sips of things, you know.
Okay.
My parents bought me what was it, a grasshopper, that thing with cramps of bed once, and I kind of liked it. The truth is I was always drawn to the theater and to performers and, you know, to those TV series where everybody was drinking and a cigarette in one hand, drink in the other, so sophisticated. I knew I wanted...
Well, geez, Frank Sinatra,
Yeah.
Dean Martin, all those variety shows.
Yeah, and I knew I wanted to live in New York, and I knew I wanted to be in the theater, and it seemed to go with the territory.
Okay.
Plus, I was, believe it or not, a little bit shy. I didn't like myself a whole lot, even though looking back, I have no idea why. I was very high functioning, late blooming, but high functioning. And when the first time I got drunk, which was when I was 17, all of a sudden I was sexy, funny, intelligent. I could move, I could dance, I could do all the things that I felt really constricted about.
Wow.
And of course, I also got sick, threw up, carried on. And the next morning, I was working with a theater company, and the next morning I woke up and thought, I'll never do that again, and couldn't wait till cocktail time to start again. I felt like I had found the key to living successfully.
Wow.
And everybody paid attention to me, and I was wearing a black turtleneck to rehearsal, and I was the drama queen I had always dreamed of being.
Amazing.
And so for the next 13 years, I tried to repeat that kind of experience. And what happened was, because the disease is progressive, it progressed. I'd started having consequences almost immediately, which I did not recognize as consequences. For me, it was really cool to be blacked out 50% of the time, to be running off with the first man I met in every bar, to be in a bar every night. I almost got kicked out of college. Thank God I did not. I came to New York to be a star, and I was going to auditions with the most horrendous hangovers and wondering why I wasn't getting work. And if I got a job, because I had wonderful opportunities, I always say much of my story was about waste and squander, because I had some talent, I had some wonderful opportunities, and I'd blow myself out of the water every time by getting drunk and acting out.
Wow.
And just losing I was like smoke. I say that, in the show we're going to talk about it.
Yes.
I was like smoke. And at age 25, I was actually singing in a Broadway show, dream come true, right? But the show was great, but the real party was after curtain.
Yeah.
And every single night, I hooked up with the other alcoholic in the cast, and we were out all night long. We'd come in matinee days. We were a mess. And basically, I blew it. He blew it worse. He died from this disease.
Oh, wow.
He was murdered. After I got sober, he was murdered. He was stabbed 111 times, undoubtedly in an alcoholic blackout in California. Had hooked up with a male hustler, was just so far gone. But anyway, back to me. It was man to man to man, bar to bar to bar, and my spirit withered.
Yeah.
It just totally withered. It kind of got to the point where I would drink and drink and drink, and I couldn't even get drunk anymore. I couldn't have fun anymore. The party was so totally over.
Yeah.
And I couldn't deal with it. I was furious at people who were still having fun drinking. Some of my drinking buddies who were still out there, and I couldn't get drunk anymore. I couldn't get sober. I would either go into a blackout or I just would fade away. I was even sometimes pouring my drink in the bar on the floor because I didn't want to drink, but I couldn't stop. And I couldn't say no.
Right.
I absolutely could not say no to anything. It was the sexual revolution. It was, it was the 60s.
It was, yep.
Yeah, I always say it wasn't sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was sex, alcohol, and musical comedy. And at right before I got sober, I wound up in a Fleabag hotel with a failed musician who was really on his way out, watching the ceiling cave in, watching the bugs on the wall, and thinking this was exactly where I belonged. And I think that was a bottom, but that was not what got me sober. What got me sober was meeting someone I really cared about, who I consistently betrayed all the time, and who kind of stuck with me, and then ultimately was doing things like taping my blackouts and playing them back to me.
Ooh.
And you can,
wow.
You can imagine how well I took to that.
Yeah.
But he called me a destroyer. One night in the midst of broken crockery and crazed behavior, he called me a destroyer. And for some reason that word stuck in my head. And then I actually got a show with she's gone now, but Mercedes McCambridge, who had testified about alcoholism. And when I was performing with her, she talked about sobriety all the time, and I started to listen, and I really admired her. And she did this thing that just killed me. It was my 30th birthday. We did the show. It was Virginia Woolf, of course, drunken brawl show. And she brought out a cake and had the audience sing to me.
Oh.
And I was so self-centered, and I couldn't imagine how anybody could be so kind. It just blew me away. So that when I came back from that gig, I started to notice people who were getting sober. And I had a couple of friends who were getting sober. And they changed. They became these lovely people. And I truly was intrigued. I truly was intrigued. I think it was my spirit wanting.
I think it was your soul.
My soul. I didn't want to be so self-centered.
Yes.
There was this, literally, a little voice in my head that said, there's got to be something better than this. And I believe it was that voice that kept me from committing suicide, although I never wanted to die. I just couldn't figure out how to live. I think it was that voice that brought me into recovery, that has kept me in recovery, that has given me, you know, once I started to recover, I never veered off track because I really felt like I had come home. And I felt like I had found a roadmap for living, a way to live.
What a beautiful statement.
Yeah, it was a way to live and a way to have a life that, for the most part, has been happy, joyous, and free. And so, you know, I don't blow opportunities anymore. I do.
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. Those terrible things don't happen anymore.
They don't happen anymore.
Those consequences.
Yeah. I got married. I had a kid. I went back to school twice. I performed.
Yes, you are a CASAC. You have a master's in fine arts. You're a licensed social work.
And yes, all those
Wow.
things. Yeah. I have my own practice in West Hampton Beach. And
You're a star.
and I'm a star with Susan. Yes.
Yes.
And I'm a star. And I.
And you wrote music for Sesame Street.
Oh, and I wrote for Sesame Street.
Oh my gosh,
Five
that's like my favorite thing.
It's kind of my favorite thing too.
Do you know
It's pretty
though,
cool.
now I have 3 children and they did watch Sesame Street. Thomas, who I lost, but always had a very deep voice. So you'd see this little baby and he had this very deep voice. But you know all the humor on Sesame Street.
Yes.
So all the adult humor. And one day, I'm giggling in the kitchen. He was sitting in the den, you know, and I hear this. I'm like, that joke was not meant for him. All the adult humor he would get. And I thought, I have my kindred spirit is inside.
It's great.
Oh, that was the best show. I just loved
Yeah.
that show.
Yeah. Yes. It was wonderful to have a child and have
Yeah.
an excuse to watch it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Susan, you have a little bit different story, but they do kind of
Yeah, but all what
overlap.
she said, pretty much.
All- yeah.
All what she said, yeah. Yeah. And then I was about in my early 20s. Well, I guess I should say that in my family, drinking was the norm.
Okay.
And I grew up believing that the most important part of the day is cocktail hour. And that is the grown-ups' time. And whenever there was any kind of stressful situation, time for a drink. And a drink was the reward. It was what made life glamorous.
Mhm.
And we really did not have any time in my family for people that didn't drink. So that's the way I brought up, that it was normal.
Do you know, because when I speak to parents, especially parents, no criticism, no judgment, but always be cognizant of who's watching you. So when you come home from work and say, I had a bad day, I'm going to have a drink, a glass of wine or a beer, that when your 10-year-old comes home from school one day and says, I had a really bad day at school, I'm going to have a glass of wine or a beer.
Well, in my family, it was a little bit disguised because having that cocktail was the embodiment of sophistication and style and grace and
adulthood.
wonderfulness. And
Yes.
it was just, I couldn't wait. Like Maggie said, I couldn't wait. When I was a little girl, I would go around pretending to hold a cigarette and having a drink. It was just the coolest thing. And my first taste of alcohol was when I was probably about 4, and it was a maraschino cherry that was just drenched with Manhattan. Oh, yeah. My sister and I would just go for those. She would get the onions from the martini, and I would get the maraschino cherries from the Manhattan. Oh, yeah. I was primed. And I kept trying
And you
to-
remember that?
Of course. Of
Wow.
course. How would I not? I mean, it was like, so for me, drinking alcohol was completely normal. Drinking alcohol on a daily basis was completely normal. I thought that I should learn how to do it well. And I would be being sort of educated by my father, particularly at home, how to order a scotch and water. And then I would go out and do my own drinking, like experimenting with beer and stuff in high school. But somehow I always got in trouble with drinking from the very beginning. I always got in trouble. And it was always usually involving shame, a blackout, saying horrible things, and then the next day...
How old were you?
But I would think I was like 16 or 17 by the time I would have a blackout. But then the next day, I remember waking up with that feeling of just remorse, like something horrible happened, but I can't remember what it was, but I know it was horrible. I don't know what it was.
So now I'll ask you to put your treatment hat on. So
Yeah.
when you were experiencing blackouts, so
Yeah.
your disease was progressed?
It was already progressed.
Yeah,
I
at the
don't
age
think,
of 16.
I think that I crossed the line. I didn't even know there was a line. I think I crossed the line when I was 4. There was no line.
You know why?
There was no line.
I had a young man who's only 25 now. His name is Stephen Dodge. And his grandfather, at the age of 9, gave him a sip of whatever it was at a family dinner. And he knew right then and there he was going to be an alcoholic because he liked it.
Well, when
And
I
he
was,
wanted more.
When I was 12, I went through a period of not wanting to drink and being very concerned about my parents drinking. And I had read an article by Jack Anderson in the Saturday Evening Post. Somehow I saw that article, and I somehow knew about AA, and I knew that there was something out there, and I used to worry terribly about my parents drinking. But this, for me, is where the two great themes of my life intersected. There was this guy. Okay, he was a psychotic guy, and I thought I could save him. Okay.
The words that every girl mutters at least once in her life.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I can understand him, and my love
I'm going to
will
love him
help
enough.
him. So I went to a Quaker school, and we were all about social justice and all that kind of good stuff. And he was a bad boy. He was a very bad boy. He was already an alcoholic at age 17. And he was always telling me how he couldn't stand Quakers, and I was too fat and this and that, and he would never take me to the dance because I wouldn't drink. I was no fun. Well, of course, one day I decided I'll show him. And I drank. I didn't like the taste of it, but I just sort of forced myself to drink that country club malt liquor. And then I was off to the races instantly. Instantly.
Wow.
And it was a path of shame and regret and all the rest of that stuff. And when I was 21, I checked myself into a mental hospital because I couldn't stop drinking and using. And they tried to, I thought I have some very probably exotic form of mental illness. I was hoping for a manic depression, like the poets I admired, all of whom committed suicide. And you know, Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, John Berryman, Robert Lowell, et cetera, et cetera. And when I found out that they had written on my chart chronic alcoholism, I was really, really those people are idiots. They don't understand my tragic case. So, but I did decide that I should stop using drugs and try to be moderate about my drinking. So from age 22 to about age 25, I really tried to be moderate with my drinking. Now, my idea of moderate would probably be your idea of alcoholic.
Yes.
Because my moderate drinking did include daily drinking, of course.
Isn't it
right?
crazy what your disease will tell you?
But then what happened after about 3 years, my father died, and I had gotten married.
Did he die of alcoholism?
No, I don't think that he did. He died of cancer. But that's his story, right?
Yeah.
But all bets were off for me. I felt like I drank with a vengeance after he died. Like, why bother trying to control this? And I had a son, and my drinking was taking off like gangbusters. And also, it was a very terrible time. And it inaugurated those last, from the time I was about 20, the years get all very blurry, but for the last sort of around 10 years, it wasn't like that crazy fun it had been in my 20s, like Maggie described, that crazy fun of waking up in some horrible place with some horrible person and thinking it's glamorous or something. It just got really, really awful. And I was in an abusive relationship, and drugs entered the picture, and I was doing all these horrible things. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I really did not know who I was, and it was a terrible time. And by the time I came into recovery, I had really lost everything. I had been homeless for about 6 months. I could not hold a job. I didn't think I was unemployable because I could always lie my way into a job. I could always convince an employer that I had the exact skills that they were looking for. Meanwhile, then I would get on the job, and a short time later they'd realize she can't do any of this.
Right, you can't do any of this
She
stuff.
doesn't know how to do any of this stuff. So I had a lot of very strange jobs at the end. I didn't think I was unemployable because I always had a job. Unfortunately, they only lasted for about a month.
Yeah.
So the last year out there, I had about 12 jobs.
Wow.
I also had about 12 roommates because I couldn't keep a roommate. I don't know why. They kept leaving, kept moving out. And I couldn't figure it out. And then when my...
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out. And then, but what got my attention was when I wasn't going, my son's father and stepmother issued legal papers in which they were going to try to take away my parental rights. Like, terminate my parental rights. It was like, definitely, either I'm going to kill myself right now, or maybe I should do something. I didn't immediately rush into sobriety, but I knew that it's either like, well, clearly my life didn't work.
Right.
I couldn't drink. Obviously, I couldn't drink, but I couldn't not drink because drinking was my whole personality. And without that, I was nothing. I had some angels guiding me toward recovery. I was in the city in Manhattan, and I used to go to this thing at St. Peter's Church in Midtown, the Jazz Vespers, because I knew I couldn't hang out with people that drank anymore. Somehow I knew that. I knew it was over.
Okay.
So I hung out at St. Peter's, and I went to the Jazz Vespers. And there were all these old jazz guys that went to this. It was just amazing. And this one jazz guy was named Eddie Bonamere, and he had what he called the Jesu Choir. And it was like my first experience of being with people that had nothing to do with drinking.
And they had fun.
And it was cool. Yeah. But nevertheless, I'm about to lose custody, and I'm really kind of thinking suicide's probably a good idea. I'm going to sign up for accidental death and dismemberment benefits, which my son will get the benefits, and isn't that going to be a good thing? And I had a sort of to-do list. bucket list, kind of. And one of the items on the bucket list was, maybe I'll check out one of those meetings. Just check it out. And so I checked it out, and of course I thought I was far superior to all those people. Back in the day, I thought I was really hip. You know, at this age, and no longer hip, but back then I thought I was pretty hip and probably too hip for any kind of corny recovery program. And they said, you know, to get phone numbers, and then if you call up this person that gave you their phone number, you'll really be helping them. And I thought, oh, I'll help this poor slob that's given me their phone number. So very soon thereafter, the two great themes intersected. There were only two things in life I could never say no to: a man and a drink. And so when my boss took me out to lunch and wanted me to order a drink because he had an agenda in addition to the employment agenda, I was really scared. So I went down in the basement where they still had phone booths back in those days, and I called this pathetic woman, and I said, what am I going to do? The boss is taking me out to lunch, and he's ordering a drink, and what am I going to do? And she gave me the great advice that people often get. And the advice was, just don't drink. Click. And so I had to go back upstairs and say no. And for me, Maggie said something, you said something about this too. For me, my right to say no was never listened to. It was taken away from me at an early age. There was no such thing as no. I just had to
suck it up and do it.
Go whatever. So I said no to the boss, and the boss was not pleased. The boss really made my life miserable from then on. But he actually did me a favor, because he made me so miserable. I went to lots and lots and lots of those meetings, and I used to complain about that boss all the time. And I wasn't going to drink. He wasn't going to drive me to drink. So I kind of, you know,
he was your challenge.
He was. And then the other thing was that I didn't think I had anything to offer my son. He was living in Connecticut, and I could only see him every other week for 5 hours. And I thought, I have nothing to offer at all. I have no money. I have no, you know, I have nothing. But people in recovery told me to just bring my love and just show up. They taught me to show up. And I learned how to show up no matter what. And so my sobriety has always been a spiritual journey of learning how to show up no matter what, and learning how to ask for help, and learning that that God is doing for me what I cannot do for myself. For me, a higher power is definitely God.
Yes.
And I feel that I have been blessed throughout my journey by so many people that whose names I don't remember or never even knew.
People come into your life for a reason,
Yeah.
a season, or a lifetime.
Right.
Yes, indeed.
Right. And so I've been sober all these years, and I've had a lot of amazing adventures, a lot of amazing adventures, and the last few years have been particularly awesome. And I think, like, Maggie and I meeting, and it's like, what?
How long have you two know each other?
Only about 5 years.
Something.
4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years.
So when did you get your case axe?
I got mine 24 years ago.
Okay, so
I started my training when I still lived in the city, and then moved out to the East End and started working at Seafield.
okay,
And that's where I was when I got my case act.
okay. And then you went on to get your
Yes,
social work.
my social work degree, and then my writing degree.
Wow.
So I got a writing degree when I was in my 20s, and I became a substance abuse counselor in 2003 when I moved out to the North Fork, and then a few years later I went into social work school, and thought, after I got my degree in social work, I thought, now I'm ready to do some stand-up comedy, I think I want to do. But I've had a private practice for a few years now, and it's really, I work with some awesome people. My clients are fantastic.
Is your definite, obviously your expertise is substance use disorder. Is that all your patients?
No, I have, I work with people whose lives have been touched by substance abuse in some way or another. It may not be the person directly involved.
Okay, may not.
Maybe the family member.
Okay.
And
Well,
also,
you certainly have insight into
also
all of that.
Also trauma. I work with people who have had trauma. And actually it seems that I work with people who are looking to find their voice. Like, who are they truly, you know? And so they may be in some kind of crisis or in a transition.
Okay.
And so we kind of walk through that together. It's a really exciting process when people discover who they really are.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That really is. We're going to go back to that, and we'll be right back after this message.
Welcome to Formula Auto Wash, where every day is a great day for a car wash. Open 7 days a week from 8 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. Sundays 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. Detailing packages for every budget, starting out at $29.99. 100% hand wash and detail centre. Horsehair and microfiber brushes and mitts. Proudly using Ecolab Blue Coral soaps and waxes. Formula Auto Wash has served the community for over 30 years. Senior discounts all day, every day. Ladies' Day Wednesday, $3 off any wash. Early bird discount Monday through Thursday till 9:30 a.m. Check out our website, formulaautowash.com.
For professional motorcycle transport and towing, think Kickstart Fabrications Motorcycle Towing. Proudly serving all of Long Island, we feature expert handling and 24/7 service. So send a limo for your toy with Kickstart Fabrications Motorcycle Towing.
Galaxy Luxury Coach is a full-service limousine and party bus company. Family-owned and operated, we are an industry leader with over 25 years of experience in providing best-in-class luxury transportation for your special event. Whether it's your precious wedding day, an all-day wine tour out east, your high school prom, that special birthday, or just an amazing night on the town, our professional chauffeurs stand ready to ensure your special event is truly special. Galaxy Luxury Coach has one of the largest and modern party bus fleets in the New York area. Our party buses are simply nightclubs on wheels. Concert sound systems, light shows, lasers and strobes, multicolor LED lighting brilliantly lights your party bus inside and out. For corporate and more laid-back events, we will cater to your specific needs and requests. What sets Galaxy aside from all others in the luxury transportation industry is our attention to detail in customizing our services to your special event. At Galaxy, it's all about you and your guests. Galaxy customers return time and time again because they know they can trust Galaxy to help deliver those lifetime memorable moments. Step aboard and let your Galaxy experience begin.
welcome back to Long Island in Crisis. So, I mean, we heard such incredible stories, and what I just said is, you know, this is not a new problem. This is not a new phenomenon. This has been around for the ages, and what you just took us through the 60s and the 70s, really finding sobriety in the 80s and the 90s. So, I mean, that's a crazy journey. This is not new. This has been, and wow, 35 years, 42 years, living long, productive, healthy lives.
Yes.
And realizing dreams and accomplishments and all of those things. So
It was
Very-
not always a bed of roses, however.
no, I can imagine that it isn't.
Right. I've had a number of tragedies during my recovery. First was the guy that I had been in the show with was murdered. I did mention that.
Yes.
And then in 1984, the house that I grew up in burned down and my mother burned to death.
Oh my God.
And that was awful. And during that period, like every relative I had practically died, every aunt, every uncle, and then of course, and my father, of course, my father died. It was just a really hard period. And 3 years after the tragedy with my mother, which was just beyond, I was speaking in tongues for like weeks. But I have to say that within 15 minutes of receiving the phone call that had happened, I was on my knees, praying on the phone, calling people in recovery. I knew I wasn't going to drink. I was already 10 years sober. I knew I was not going to drink. 3 years later, my best friend in the program was murdered by her husband. There was a history of domestic violence. There were children involved, children who were playing with my child. She and I were very, very close. I was involved in the case. I had to testify. I had to walk my child past the window where this guy, who I knew had murdered his wife, would sit in the window and watch me walking to school with my kid. And I was terrified. It was absolutely terrifying. I think it's one of the things that drove me out of the city. He was finally imprisoned and died in prison. But that whole thing took about 3 years. So during that period, all was not happy, joyous, and
Yeah.
free. But I knew that
But you did it sober.
whatever I was going through, if I picked up a drink, it would get worse.
Yes.
Instead of having one or two issues, I would have one more that would just obliterate everything I had attempted to build during my recovery. And I didn't drink. And people saved me. Talking saved me. Writing saved me. Write. You know? Thank God for the tools of recovery.
Thank God for the tools of recovery.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a wonderful
You know, I just
toolbox.
met, I was sharing with you, I practice yoga, and I met a beautiful young man, Taylor Hunt, who wrote Away from Darkness. And IV heroin user, and started practicing yoga and never stopped. And now he is one of the
Wow.
most well-regarded instructors. He wrote a book, and he has a foundation that they raise money so that they can scholarship people who are leaving treatment or going into recovery to continue their yoga practices as another tool
How
for recovery.
great.
You know, so
Yeah.
some people may really take to writing. Some people, you know, it really is unimportant what your passion is.
As long as you
It's
find
just,
it.
as long as you find what your passion is.
Yeah.
And what makes you meditate for that moment
Mm-hmm.
about something other than I need a drink or a drug.
Yes. How
Yeah.
true.
How true. I still love, and I know that, look, he wrote a book. So he wrote a book because that all had to come out. And he's very open with what happens, and he's a journaler too. So, and tell me, Susan, so how did you maintain your sobriety for 35 years? 35 years.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
for me, it was a sort of a different path. When I got sober, I remembered and got in touch with a lot of trauma from early childhood. And that combined with not being able to raise my son, I was in a very emotionally, well, you could use a technical term, basket case,
Yeah.
whack job.
Train
wreck.
Okay.
Okay.
Kind of a
That was
total
painting a very good picture.
Yeah.
So I was this basket case, and I had all these mood swings, this, that, and a third, and I have subsequently, now as I'm a therapist and actually working in the field of trauma, I have learned that very often women who are suffering from, or people who are suffering from complex PTSD will often appear to have other diagnoses.
Yes.
So I was diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, which I did actually not in fact have. And so I was medicated for bipolar disorder, which was like, you know, zombie time.
Yeah.
And so for many years I was on all of these psych meds, and I was living this sort of twilight existence. I was sober, I was doing all the right things, but I
Still
thought
not
that I
living.
was like, you know, I considered myself to be mentally ill. That was my
Yeah.
story. I'm mentally ill. And so for years, that was...
We're all mentally
I
ill.
lived a life, well, you know, with a major diagnosis,
Yeah.
type mentally ill. And so I lived that life until finally I was able to find someone, a psychiatric nurse practitioner who had a holistic point of view, who was able to help me to get off all of those meds. And it was not that long ago, actually, that I was able to get off every medication. And that's when I feel as though my sobriety came into full color. I had sobriety before, but it was definitely, it was all in shades of gray.
Okay.
And I just was like numb. I was numb. I was like bumping into walls, but I couldn't feel anything, okay? And I was able to, the only relationship that I was able to have during that time was with my husband. He was like my only friend. And so I feel as though I was kind of very blessed to come off of all the medications and to discover meditation. So it was a journey from medication to meditation. And in meditation, I learned really how to sit with first of all, how to have all these feelings and to be with them. So my sobriety is kind of like, it's a sort of a second blossoming of sobriety.
Wow. What a beautiful way to put
Right?
it.
That began
Yeah.
to happen just before I met Maggie, actually. You know, so I was really newly available to be able to be a friend. I was newly able to share. And so I have that kind of a newcomer's gratitude. You know, it's like it still feels sort of new to me, the idea that I can have
Well, you're
any
so
feeling
bubbly.
at all. I can feel all my feelings, and they're all okay. And now I also am really, really grateful that I've been able to work with people with complex trauma who appear to be bipolar, they appear to be borderline personalities, they appear to be these various things. But then when you cut back down to getting down to the nitty
Peel
gritty,
the onion.
oh, there's major childhood sexual abuse here or whatever. And to be able to see that, it's like, I mean, I always have to have a caveat that some people who are on psychiatric medication are being truly helped by those medications.
Yes.
They need to be on those medications.
Absolutely.
And I'm not like, you know, anti-medication at all. But I believe that the medication has to match the disorder.
Yes.
and that we need to be really, really careful about how we diagnose what's with people.
I think that we are overdiagnosed in this
Oh
country.
my God.
Every child has ADD, ADHD.
Yes.
Right.
And
we
they don't.
And often the medication just masks what the real issue is, and they never get to the
Yes.
bottom of it.
And then you get-
it's the last resort for me in my practice. I try whatever program somebody might need. Exercise, I believe, is absolutely the best anxiety and depression medication on the planet.
Absolutely.
Nutrition, yoga, meditation, all.
Eastern philosophies.
Yes, the whole holistic
Yes.
approach to recovery. And what I have found with many of my patients is that when they embrace that, suddenly they're not bipolar anymore. Suddenly the depression lifts and they're able to really embrace their lives.
Yes.
And so often it's masked, just like it was with Susan.
And so often it's just the physician or the therapist, the patient wants a magic pill.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I want
Yeah,
this
yeah.
fixed yesterday.
Oh, yeah. I
So
wanted,
just give me a pill.
I wanted to
and I'm
stop
okay.
crying. I
Right.
mean, every time I saw a kid, I would start crying. Okay, it's inconvenient because there's a lot of children around.
Yes.
And I was triggered by so many different things that I can understand why a psychiatrist talking with me for a very short period of time would say emotional volatility, this and that, and, other symptoms and stuff, and say, oh, well, you have rapid cycling bipolar disorder. Like, yeah. But I do think that actually basket case was probably the better diagnosis.
Well, what a traumatic thing is to lose the custody of your son.
It was horrible.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
not going to say that you didn't deserve that
No,
at
I
the
didn't.
moment in time that you were.
I think at the
But
moment
still-
in time, it was
appropriate.
important for his well-being to be considered. Whatever that meant had to happen. But there's a whole lot of misunderstanding out there about recovery,
Yes.
and there's so much stigmatizing of people who have a problem, and
Shame and stigma
Right?
still kills this
it's
generation.
amazing.
Parents that are struggling and suffering with,
Mm-hmm.
if they all stood on the soccer field and actually spoke to one another,
Oh
they
my
would all
God.
have this
Mm-hmm.
woven fabric together, that they're all going through the same experiences, but we're all doing it in separate silos.
Well, look what happened in the restaurant.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Suddenly there was a whole society of people
Absolutely.
who are
So
involved
for
in this.
whoever's listening tonight, we had dinner, and the waitress shared with us
Yes,
about her family.
yes.
And
because-
please,
Yeah, and
and-
substance abuse has touched everybody's
Everyone,
family.
you
We're
know.
all in recovery from something.
we're all in recovery from, or we're all in crisis from something.
Yes,
And
The world is a harsh place.
it is.
the way things tie together is that we find that with the whole idea of stigma and shame, again, here is where writing or using your voice
Yes.
is the strongest possible way to counter that. And so that's always been part of our message, to be able to say what needs to be said.
Yes. In
Because
such a powerful way.
Because it's freeing. It's not only freeing to me to say that, but then to the person listening to it, it opens a space for them. And so many people did that for us in our recovery, and
Yes.
just listening to other people and thinking like, how could somebody actually talk about that?
Yeah.
They're talking about that. And then we learned to
People-
step through that.
The general public is so uncomfortable with so many things.
Yes.
They're uncomfortable, a few months after I lost Thomas. I didn't want to shop in my own little town because I didn't want to really talk to too many people. But I also didn't want the face that people get, I didn't want that.
Yes.
Don't look at me like that.
Yes.
Don't. And one woman who I apparently thought that she knew me much deeper than being an acquaintance said, you know, Linda, you really have to get back out into the world. It's been a few months.
Oh, God.
So I thought for a moment, and I didn't hit her or anything. I just said, is that how you handled the death of your child? I didn't lose my child. Then I had a few choice words for her.
Uh-huh.
And as I was leaving with the manager, because he said, come on, I'll walk you outside. And he had known me, and he knew my son, he knew the family. I said, clearly I'm not ready for the public. And he said, they're not ready for you.
That's right.
That awkwardness in you feeling that you need to solve my problem for me
Yeah.
with a word
Oh,
is not going to happen. So whatever happened to saying, I have no words for you, but can I give you a hug?
exactly.
I'm thinking about you.
Yep.
I hope, you know, that tomorrow gets better.
I tell my patients who are grieving, I see a lot of patients who are grieving, that there used to be that wonderful tradition of wearing a black armband for a year after somebody died. And it was to let the world know that you were fragile, that you were vulnerable, to treat me kindly
Yes.
because I'm going through something. And these days, it's like, oh, he died on Friday, well, you'll be back at work on Monday, right? I mean, you cannot do that. You cannot avoid that grieving process.
No, you can't.
And
You can't hurry it.
No, you
And
can't.
you can't, the only thing you can do is honor it.
Exactly. Honor
Honor it
whatever
wherever
feelings
it is
come up.
at the moment in time that you're there.
Yes.
I just wanted to share a very quick story about my deciding to go off all the medications was really prompted by the fact that I knew I couldn't feel anything, and things that other people were crying about, I just couldn't even feel. So what happened in my little town was a family lost a son who was 22, I think, or 23, in Afghanistan. And the whole community rallied around this family and were grieving for them. And I wanted to grieve for them, but I couldn't feel anything. And I wanted to write a poem for them, but I couldn't feel anything. And so that's actually, because to lose a son, to lose a child, is the most profound experience that is like incomprehensibly horrible. And I really wanted to be able to stand there and share in that family's loss. I couldn't feel anything. So that's really what sent me, like I want to feel the pain that other people are feeling. You know, if you can't feel the pain that other people are feeling, you also can't feel the joy.
That's
Right?
right.
Exactly right.
That's
you can't
right.
feel anything.
But
Listening to you is something that my son would say to me is not feeling high, not feeling that that euphoria,
Yeah.
that in recovery for him at those moments, because it would take a long time from heroin. You don't feel anything.
Right.
You're kind of
Right. Right.
just dead inside.
Right.
You can't feel for a while.
Well, that's, you know, you mentioned before that I remember what sustained me a lot in those early years of recovery was that wonderful sentence, don't quit 5 minutes before the miracle. And I
Yes.
just love that. Like the idea of a miracle was just a definite fact. The miracle
Yes.
is on its way,
Yes.
and it could be 5 minutes from
Well,
now.
you know, when people embrace spirituality too and faith, and you say, I know it's going to happen. I know that my higher power is going to do something for me. But patience is God's timing, not mine.
Well, I have waited for I started writing my one-woman show in 1976 when I was still out there. And I have waited for a really, really long time.
And it came in 2016.
2016, Maggie said, why don't we put our things together and see, you know, like that. And it's like, everything is like that. It's like in God's time, not our time.
Yes.
You know, when I think of things, because sometimes I'll have these wonderful conversations with God, like, you know, I'm ready, so I'm not sure what you're doing, but you know, I'm ready.
Right.
And I will rationalize, and then I'll step back and be a little bit more humble. And then I start to realize how many things really have to get put into place, because when you really think about when people come into your lives, those brief
Oh, my
encounters that you
goodness.
have that are absolutely life changing,
Yep.
that all those things have to come into place. And maybe he's got a few other people to handle besides me. So that patience thing again.
And they are angels. And
They are angels. You know,
and-
I didn't share with you, you know, when Thomas, the morning that Thomas passed, I was on a train to Manhattan. And at 7:15 a.m., my youngest son called me, and I was on an express train, and I had to get home. And with everything that I had to keep myself together and tell the conductor what happened, and hearing the words that came out of my mouth, mind-boggling, and being let off at a very remote station in Cold Spring Harbor. And there was this angel of a woman who saw me walking in a circle, saw me really, I don't know what I looked like, I can't. You know, I was in a business suit, that was about it. And she pulled up and said, if you'll trust me, I'll take you wherever you need to go.
Oh,
And I was like, well, all right. And I got in the car, and she prayed with me, she cried with me,
Oh.
and she took me right home. So everything was worked out for me, but I had to recognize, and I have recognized that very soon after that, like, wow, God had that all worked out for me. He had everyone in place
oh my
to get me
goodness.
back to my home.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves.
Yes, always.
And the thing about the miracle happening and not leaving is that I think, you know, addicts who are detoxing, they go low, and that often takes them back out. But what I always try to tell them is that as low as you've gone, that's the place of joy you can get to if
Yes.
you stay sober and just hang in there. and
Sometimes
work
you've
it.
got to hang in there when you don't think you can.
I'll say.
You know, and believe me, there's way too many parents that are in my club, and
Yes.
speaking with them. And without my faith, I don't know where I would be. And my faith includes knowing that I need to do physical activity, that I need to meditate, that I need to write, that I need to cry, that I
Yes.
need to scream, that I need to
Yes.
do whatever it is I need to do at that moment in time, that I need to do it. And acknowledge it, that it's okay that I do these things.
It's just occurring to me that probably quite a few of the people who might be listening to this, watching this show, are people who have suffered a loss
Yes.
Yes.
of someone in their family from addiction or from mental illness, and they may not be feeling any faith whatsoever right now. And I think that our message for those people is that it's okay if you don't feel faith at all right now. We will hold the faith for you.
Yes.
We will have faith for you
Until you
That-
have faith.
that you are being cared for, and it may be in the form of that anonymous person who suddenly is going to give you a ride somewhere.
Without a doubt.
Wow.
You know, but I always think of where were you, you know, the footsteps.
Right.
Yes.
There was only one set of footsteps. I was carrying you. And I always think of that. And I always, you know, go through my own things. So when I can't sleep or when I'm having a bad day, I will just say, can you just wrap me up in your big hands and just hold me, because I don't want to hold myself today.
Right.
And you have peace again. So, you know, but you're right, we will hold that place. And speaking to people in treatment, And I had a couple of very profound, a young woman who said, I was praying to God when I was being beaten. And I was praying to God while I was being brutally raped. Where was he? Wow. And her and I talked later by ourselves, you know, and what do you say? And the only thing I could say was, apparently, I don't know what your life's weave will look like when your design is finished. But maybe you needed, God was there with you, certainly, when you were going through that, and maybe you're going to help. Maybe that's going to be your path to help someone else. We don't know why we go through the horrible things in our lives. You know?
No, we don't. But I do know that what recovery gives us
Yes.
an opportunity for kindness, joy, and gratitude.
Absolutely.
Every
And that
day.
doesn't excuse you from that life is going to happen to you.
Absolutely.
Bad
not.
things or seemingly bad things, life happens. Death happens, life happens, joy happens, sadness happens. You cannot get attached to any one of those feelings, because if you only stay attached to the really good ones, the really bad ones seem that much worse.
That's right.
So that's the practice of yoga too, is just be in the present moment and know that you are supported and you're okay.
I'm just like, just wanted to come back to what you had said before about the young woman who said to you, where was God when she was being brutally raped? I can't help but feel like that God is with us being brutally raped
Yes.
as well, and that we're never alone. And I think that that sometimes we have to have these very traumatic paths in order to find out what's really, really important.
Yes.
I have worked with people who shared traumas with me that the trauma was so terrible that I almost couldn't hear it. I felt like almost like I'm experiencing it, and it's just awful. But we witness for each other. We witness for each other. We are there for each other. Like we take a stand for each other.
Yes.
And just in doing that, I think that is kind of God is working through us.
Without a doubt.
Right? So that you're listening to that young woman sharing that is like you were standing in for a power greater than she. That is like she is accepted and loved in the moment. And I think that's
Without
where
a doubt.
the healing
That's really
comes from, right?
what we talked about on the side, you know, and I gave her a big hug and said, he's always with you. He's always with you.
And that's the beginning of healing.
That's the beginning of healing. The magic that happened by her saying that was that the counselors that were in the room had never heard these things from any one of them. And that gave her a moment to have whatever I sparked in her by talking about faith, that gave her the courage to speak those words out loud for the first time in her life, which was the beauty of healing in that moment in time. Then.
Yes.
In that moment in time, she didn't even know she was on the road to recovery.
You know, in doing our work, we're always trying to create that space for people to step into and to say that thing they've never said before, and to share that thing they've never said before. And you had, I think you had wanted us to possibly mention the opportunity that we've created for people to do that, which is an open mic poetry reading called Poetry Street, which occurs on the fourth Sunday of every month in Riverhead at the Blue Duck Bakery Cafe. And we created it in a sober environment where people would be able to step up to an open mic and read something that they've written. We've had so many people
Or to listen to what they've written. I can't believe that I have to say this to you, but we are out of time. I want anyone that, you know, in 2 weeks, these beautiful women will be sharing with you the power of their writing and the show that they've created and the therapy that they do with writing. And if you want any information about where they are in Riverhead or how to get in touch with them, please contact Thomas's Hope Facebook page or send me an email. There's a lot of ways to get in touch with me, and I know you all know how to find them. So please, and we have 2 events this weekend. Saturday is the Interfaith Festival over in Port Jefferson at the Little Friary. And Saturday night in Oceanside is a fundraiser for Thomas's Hope at Michael's Porthole. So we hope to see you, and I'll see you next week. Have a blessed week.
Another dark hotel room, musty people.